incest victim. I've been working in therapy for over 10 years with the issues. I come from a family that my father's an alcoholic. My mother is mentally ill. The abuse started when I was very young, infant, up until the time I was 18 and I left home. I was raped many times by my father and my oldest brother. My older sister and brother, and I have a younger brother and a sister, and all of them choose not to remember anything. They're substance abusers or overeaters. And it was probably about 10 years ago when I started having physical symptoms. And I went into therapy and started dealing with the issues.
And what would you like to have happen?
I would like to stop feeling guilty about hating my parents.
And when you feel guilty, where do you feel guilty? When you feel guilty?
In my head, and in my heart, and in my stomach.
And in your head, and in your heart, and in your stomach. And when you feel guilty in your head and your heart and your stomach, where do you feel guilty the most?
In my heart.
And when you feel guilty in your heart, whereabouts in your heart do you feel guilty?
All over.
And when you feel guilty all over, and it's in your heart, whereabouts in your heart?
It's on the outside. It's like a fire burning.
And it's like a fire burning. And what kind of fire could that fire be when it's like a fire burning?
One that's out of control.
And is there anything else about a fire that's burning and it's out of control?
It's as if my whole chest is on fire as a result of it.
And your whole chest is on fire. And as your whole chest is on fire, is there anything else about that fire?
It's getting closer and closer to the outside.
And it's getting closer and closer to the outside. And as it gets closer and closer to the outside, and you feel guilty in your head and in your heart and in your stomach, and whereabouts in your head do you feel guilty as it gets closer and closer to the outside?
Right behind my eyes.
And when it's right behind your eyes, whereabouts right behind your eyes?
At the bottom of my eyes.
And at the bottom of your eyes. And when it's at the bottom of your eyes, does it have a shape or a size?
Yes, it's a large tear.
And it's a large tear. And is there anything else about a large tear like that? Large tear.
It's white.
And it's white. And what kind of white could that white be?
It's changing colors. It's crystal clear now.
And it's crystal clear. And is there anything else about a tear that's crystal clear?
It's waiting to fall.
And it's waiting to fall. And it's waiting to fall. And it's crystal clear. And a fire burning. And when you feel guilty, and you feel guilty in your stomach, whereabouts do you feel guilty in your stomach when a fire is wanting to burn out and a tear that's crystal clear is waiting to fall?
Right in the center.
And right in the center. And when it's right in the center, whereabouts right in the center?
It's towards the top of the stomach.
And it's towards the top of the stomach. And when it's towards the top of the stomach, does it have a shape or a size?
Round.
And it's round. And it's round like what?
I don't know yet.
And it's round. And when it's round, is there anything else about it when it's round?
It pulsates.
And it pulsates. And it's round. And it pulsates. And it's near the top of your stomach. And when it pulsates like what?
Like a heartbeat.
And like a heartbeat. And is there anything else about that heartbeat?
It's getting louder.
And it's getting louder. And as a heartbeat is getting louder, is there anything else about that heartbeat that's getting louder?
It wants to move up and get out of the stomach.
And it wants to move up and get out of the stomach. And can a heartbeat that wants to move up and get out of the stomach and is beating louder, and can a heartbeat begin to move up?
It's changed. It's now become a drum.
And it's now a drum. And what kind of drum could that drum be?
I don't know.
And what could a drum like that drum like to have happen? And what could a drum like that drum like to do?
It wants the little girl to play it.
And a drum wants a little girl to play it. And as a drum wants a little girl to play it, could a little girl be interested in playing that drum?
Yes.
And how old could a little girl be who would like to play a drum like that drum?
Maybe 6 or 7.
And maybe 6 or 7. And what could maybe 6 or 7 be wearing when 6 or 7 would like to play that drum?
She has a dress on, but she wants to wear blue jeans and a t-shirt.
And she has a dress on, and she would like to wear blue jeans and a t-shirt. And how could she be able to wear blue jeans and a t-shirt? And would she be interested in wearing blue jeans first or a t-shirt first?
Her blue jeans.
And her blue jeans. And can she put on a pair of blue jeans?
Mm-hmm.
And would she take her dress off before she put on the blue jeans or after she put on the blue jeans?
After.
And can she put on a pair of blue jeans?
Yes.
And does she like a pair of blue jeans?
Mm-hmm.
And what would she like to do next?
She'd like a nice t-shirt, clean.
And can she have a nice, clean t-shirt?
Mm-hmm.
And when she can have a nice, clean t-shirt, what does she do next?
And she puts it on and tucks it in.
And as she puts it on and tucks it in,
Mm-hmm.
what would she like to do to her dress?
Throw it away.
And can she throw a dress away now that she has a nice, clean t-shirt that's tucked into a pair of blue jeans?
Mm-hmm.
And would she like any kind of shoes to go with those blue jeans?
Yes, gym shoes.
And can she have gym shoes?
Mm-hmm.
And what would she like to do when she has gym shoes and blue jeans and a clean, tucked-in t-shirt?
Start playing her drum and march right out of that house.
And can she play that drum?
Mm-hmm.
And as she plays that drum, can she begin to march out of that house?
Yes.
And does she need anything else as she begins to march out of that house?
She doesn't want anybody to stop her.
And what happens as she begins to march out of that house?
She looks to her mom's bedroom and makes sure that she's not coming out.
And as she looks to her mum's bedroom and makes sure she's not coming out, and what happens next?
The little girl starts getting scared.
And she starts getting scared. And what happens to her drum when she starts getting scared?
Her stomach gets tight.
And her stomach gets tight. And as her stomach gets tight, it gets tight like what?
Like someone wringing out a dish rag.
And it gets tight like someone wringing out a dish rag. And is there anything else about that tight like someone wringing out a dish rag?
They just keep getting tighter and tighter and pulling it.
And they keep getting tighter and tighter and pulling it. And as they keep getting tighter and tighter and pulling it,
The little girl stops dead in her tracks.
And she stops dead in her tracks. And then what happens?
She feels as if her feet are glued to the floor.
And feet are glued to the floor. And as feet are glued to the floor, what happens next?
She can't move.
And she can't move. And feet are glued to the floor, and she can't move. And a drum.
Mm-hmm.
And a tear that's clear in eye that wants to fall. And a fire that burns in a chest and wants to burn out of a chest. And a little girl in blue jeans and a clean t-shirt tucked in and feet in gym shoes that are glued to the floor. And she can't move. And take all the time that she needs to discover how long can't she move for, and what happens after she can't move, and take all the time that she needs to know how long she can't move for, and about what happens after she can't move. While she's processing that particular piece of information, we'll just take some moments to recapitulate some of the experience so that you can understand the strategy and the process as you develop the questions. So to begin with, we get 3 locations about how she knows she's guilty: head, heart, and stomach. And what we want to develop, first of all, is the most intense, and then give each of the metaphors and develop each one. So first of all, we find that there's fire in the chest, and then we find there's a teardrop that's about to fall in the eye, and then this pounding that ends up to be a drum that's in the top of the stomach. As we've locused on the drum, it starts changing. So what I want to listen for is, as I develop each of the metaphors information, the one which seems to want to change and develop is probably the one to stay with. And so there's a drum, and then the next piece of information we get is the drum wants a little girl to play it. So we notice that in valuing the drum and its pounding, it takes on characteristics of its own. So here, for the first time, we find that we have a child within that is associated here in the stomach with the drum. Then I want to develop the features of the child within. So the first series of questions developed each of the metaphors, and then we have the child within, and so that's why I take time to dress her. It's usually very significant when a child wants to put on blue jeans and a t-shirt. It's a fairly common characteristic because they feel a lot more vulnerable often in dresses. So in developing the child within, we then find that she wants to leave the house. And in leaving the house, she walks past the mother's door. And these questions, we are in fact maturing the information or making the information move along so that the child is growing up. So she's not exactly the same age we found her. She may be a few seconds or minutes older, the time it takes to walk down the passage. Then she finds that she's scared. And at that stage, I wasn't too sure whether to go for the metaphor of being scared inside or to find out what characteristics are occurring externally. And her locus, of course, became on her feet, where they became stuck like glue. And here at this stage, I want to value that stuckness, because this child wants to escape the house, and what we usually can figure out is usually the first solutions that a child within wants, they're not generally going to work. So we value the place of being stuck and want to be in no hurry at all about being unstuck. We have the metaphors of the tear and the fire and the drum, which can accompany her in being glued to the floor. So the next questions will involve just moving time. See, it may not be possible, and I don't want to encourage her to actually move and become unglued, because that's usually beyond her control. And it's very difficult to make a child within do things now that were not possible to do then. So hence I want to encourage the environment, that is things outside and beyond her control. And the simplest one to begin with is simply to make time move. How long will you be glued for? So let's just follow the next series of questions and find out what happens. And how long will you be glued floor? And what happens after she's glued? And what happens next?
It seems like a long time.
And it seems like a long time. And how long is a long time? And what happens after a long time?
She was busy trying to make her feet move, and there's a shadow coming.
And there's a shadow coming. And she was busy trying to make her feet move. And as a shadow comes, what does a shadow do next as a shadow comes?
It stands over her.
And as a shadow stands over her, what happens next as a shadow stands?
She gets real scared this time.
And she gets real scared this time. And when she gets real scared, where does she get real scared?
All over.
And she gets real scared all over. And as she gets real scared all over, whereabouts all over?
In her face.
And in her face. And when it's in her face, is it on the inside of her face or on the outside?
Both.
And does it have a shape or a size?
Like a fist.
And it's like a fist. And is there anything else about that fist?
It's big.
And it's big. And when a fist is big, what would a fist that's big like to do? And would a fist that's big be interested in going to a shadow that stands over her?
It's the shadow's fist.
And it's the shadow's fist. And what does a shadow's fist want to do?
Hit the little girl.
And as the shadow's fist hits the little girl, how many hits does a shadow's fist hit?
Many times.
And many times. And as a shadow's fist hits a little girl many times, and many times, a shadow's fist hits the little girl. And how long does a shadow's fist hit? And how long does a shadow's fist hit?
I don't know how long.
And a shadow's fist hits. And could a drum that was in top of stomach be interested in going to a shadow's fist that hits?
Yeah.
And what happens when a drum goes to a shadow's fist that hits?
The fist bounces off of the drum.
And the fist bounces off of the drum. And how different it is when a fist bounces off of a drum.
Mm-hmm.
And a drum can have a fist pound and bounce off a drum, and a face doesn't have to have a shadow's fist hit it any longer. And does a face like that and what would a drum like to do when a fist bounces off of it?
Just let it hit it as long as it wants to.
And as a fist hits a drum as long as it wants to, what happens next?
Then Mother doesn't have to be angry anymore.
And Mother doesn't have to be angry anymore. And Mother doesn't have to be angry anymore. And what does a fist do next when a mother doesn't have to be angry anymore?
She leaves a little girl alone.
And she leaves a little girl alone. And what does a mother do when she leaves a little girl alone?
She goes in her bedroom and closes the door.
And as she goes in her bedroom and closes the door, what happens next?
There's part of the little girl who wants to get up and leave now. There's a part of the little girl who doesn't want to leave.
And there's a part that wants to leave, and there's a part that doesn't. And she goes in her bedroom. And where is the part of a little girl who wants to leave?
In her head.
And whereabouts in her head?
In her brain.
And in her brain. And when there's a part of a little girl who wants to leave and it's in her brain, does it have a shape or a size when it's in her brain?
No, it just feels angry.
And it feels angry. And when it feels angry, what's it like when it feels angry?
Like a fire.
And it's like a fire. And what kind of fire is that fire?
It's like a pot boiling.
And it's like a pot boiling. And is there anything else about that pot boiling?
It's getting hotter and hotter.
And it's getting hotter and hotter. And as the pot boiling is getting hotter and hotter, is there anything else about a pot boiling like that pot boiling?
Yes, sooner or later it's going to spill over.
And sooner or later it's going to spill over. And when it's going to spill over sooner or later, and there's a part of a little girl that doesn't want to leave, whereabouts is that part of a little girl that doesn't want to leave?
In the heart.
And in the heart. And whereabouts in the heart?
Tucked way back in a corner.
And is there anything else about that corner?
It's very dark.
And it's dark like what?
Like a closet.
And dark like a closet. And is there anything else about that closet?
She's just sitting in the corner.
And she's sitting in the corner. And as she's sitting in the corner and it's dark like a closet, is there anything else?
She just wants to be left alone.
And she wants to be left alone. And she wants to be left alone. And as she wants to be left alone, what would she like to do next?
Clean up her face.
And how can she clean up her face? And what would she need to clean up her face?
A nice warm washcloth.
A nice warm washcloth. And where could a nice warm washcloth be?
Maybe her sister could bring it to her.
And could her sister bring a nice warm washcloth?
Yeah.
And as her sister brings her a nice warm washcloth, what happens next?
Makes her face feel better.
And does her face feel better?
Yeah.
And as her face feels better, what would she like to do next?
She'd like to leave now.
And can she leave a corner of a dark closet when her face feels better?
Yes.
And as she leaves the corner of a dark closet, what happens next?
It's like the part of her that's angry and the part of her that's sad gets back together.
And the part that's angry and the part that's sad gets back together. And as those parts get back together, and what happens next? And take a little time for her to discover about a pot that's nearly boiling over, that's angry, and about a part of her in the heart that's dark, like a closet, and about a face that's been washed by a warm cloth. And take a little time to discover just what can happen when the part that's sad and the part that's angry come together. At this next stage, we now have the child within, and the shadow comes. And what that child is trying to say to us is pay attention to the shadow, not to my body or my internal feelings. And then we get the feeling on the face of a fist that belongs to the shadow. So I had thought that fist might be a metaphor that could go out and take care of the shadow, but it was in fact imposed on there by the shadow. And isn't it wonderful how these metaphors, this pounding that's been in the top of her stomach and was in the form of a drum, could then be used to take the pounding. And so that was the invitation, to bring the drum to the face, and then the fist from the shadow could then pound on the drum. And a drum can take the pounding where a face can't. And see, that then helps individuate and frees the child from the shadow and the hauntingness of that shadow. And then the child then goes to her room. Now what happens in the room is that she then splits. And of course dissociation is a very important survival mechanism, and you have to value both parts. So a part of her wants to go and a part wants to stay. And the part that wants to stay becomes, in fact, the boiling pot. So here we have a boiling pot that's boiling, and then I want to get the part that wants to stay, and so we get the corner of a closet, and then what we find is another child within. So there's part of the fragmentation. This child then needs the face cloth which the sister can bring. And you notice that after doing that intervention, we then have the two parts, the angry part and what you label as the sad part, wanting to get together. So I just want to leave time for that to occur. And so we'll begin with the next question. And what happens next when an angry part and a sad part want to get together?
They start to fight with one another.
And they start to fight with one another. And as they fight, what happens next?
The angry part wants to leave and wants the other one to come with her.
And as the angry part wants to leave, then what happens?
But they've been told they can't leave.
And they can't leave. And when they can't leave, what does the angry part do?
She doesn't care what she's been told.
And then what happens?
The other one tries to reason with her. Because mom's expecting a baby. She can't leave her alone.
And she can't leave her alone. And the angry part wants to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens next?
She feels torn apart.
And she's torn apart. And she is torn apart. And where is she torn apart?
It feels like right down the center.
And right down the center. And she's torn apart like what?
Like a cloth.
And what kind of cloth could that cloth be?
I don't know.
And is there anything else about that cloth?
It's like a rag.
And it's like a rag. And is there anything else about that rag?
No.
And what would that rag like to do?
I don't know.
And a rag that's torn apart. And a rag that's torn apart. Would a rag that's torn apart be interested in going to a pot that was boiling? And what could a rag do to a pot that was boiling?
Mm. If you held the rags in your hands, then you could carry the pot and not get burned.
And could you hold a rag in your hands? And could a rag that was torn apart be interested in going to both hands?
Yes.
And could those hands hold the pot that was boiling?
Yes.
And what would those hands like to do to a pot that was boiling?
Spill it on the floor.
And could those hands begin to spoil a pot that was boiling on the floor? And what floor would they like to spill the boiling on?
The dining room.
And can they spill the boiling on the dining room floor?
Yes.
And as it spills on the dining room floor, what happens next?
The little girl's shoes aren't stuck to the floor anymore.
And the little girl's shoes aren't stuck to the floor anymore. And what does a little girl do when her shoes aren't stuck to the floor anymore?
She hurries up and puts them on.
And then what happens?
She leaves.
And she leaves. And what would she like to do to a pot and to a rag when she leaves?
Just leave them there.
And can she leave them there?
Mm-hmm.
And can she leave
Yes.
And as she leaves, what happens next?
She takes a little girl that's sad with her.
And she takes a little girl that's sad with her. And can a little girl that's sad go with her?
Yes.
And as a little girl that's sad goes with her, then what happens?
They just keep running.
And they just keep running. And can they just keep running?
Yeah.
And as they just keep running, where do they just keep running to?
A playground.
And to a playground. And what could they do when they just keep running to a playground?
They're not sure they're safe there.
And they're not sure they're safe there. And what would they like to do when they're not sure they're safe there?
They just want to rest a while and think this out.
And can they rest a while and think this out?
Yes.
And let them take a little time to rest a while and to think this out. And they can rest and think this out. And so as they rest and think this out, we have a wonderful example of the healing properties of the metaphors. And it occurred to me, I forgot all about that rag that was tight in the stomach. That might have been useful for wiping the face in the wardrobe. So what we have now is she's torn in half like a rag. And I'm trying to search around how can this be useful. So what I do know is we now have this rag which is torn in half. And I'm trying to figure out how I can use and bring these metaphors together so that they can complete themselves. I think metaphors are fragments of this information that is stored in different locations. So by bringing them together, they're able to add different information. And so wasn't it wonderful when the rag could be torn in half and could be used for her hands to hold a pot? And so it sure was a surprise that the pot would want to be spilled on the kitchen floor, because I forgot all about that. We got all this from the child who was in fact glued to the kitchen floor. And that's the way she was freed. And this is the wonderful use of anger. You see, I commissioned that pot to do a useful work by asking what it wanted. So rather than just expressing that anger in the dichotomy of the split between the angry part and the sad part, the angry part serves a useful purpose, and then the child can be free and also bring the sad part with her. So I think that's a wonderful example of the use of metaphor and its empowering and its healing ability when we provide a suitable context. It's no good boiling up here in the head, but it's just fine for being a solvent for the glue. And so now we rest a while in the playground. And it's still interesting to think about. We still have the metaphor of a tear here, and we still have the fire, which has not been used at this stage. So we just gently grow out the information and then find out what's going to happen. So we'll ask the next question. And what happens next when they rest for a while?
It's trying to think of someplace they can go.
And they're trying to think of some place they can go. And could a tear that's clear and an eye, could a tear that's clear be interested in going to them when they're trying to think of some place they could go? Or could a fire that's burning in chest, could a fire be interested in going to them in a playground when they're trying to think of some place to go?
Yes.
And what can happen?
Just trying to find out who would be just the right person that they could go to.
And how can they find out? And could a tear that's clear find that out? Or could a fire that burns find that out?
A fire that burns.
And a fire that burns. And where would a fire that burns like to burn out to?
To her Aunt Marie or Aunt Phyllis.
And can a fire that burns burn to an Aunt Maria or an Aunt Phyllis?
Yes.
And as a fire burns to an Aunt Maria and an Aunt Phyllis, what happens next?
The fire starts going out.
And as the fire starts going out, then what happens?
She feels safe.
And she feels safe. And as the fire starts going out and she feels safe, and what would a tear that's crystal clear like to do?
She can finally cry.
And she can finally cry. And can a tear that's been waiting to fall be interested in beginning to fall?
Yes, she feels safe at her Aunt Phyllis's house.
And she feels safe at her Aunt Phyllis's house. And where would a tear like to fall?
Right down her face.
And can it fall right down her face?
Mm-hmm.
And as it falls right down her face, would it like to go to a heart that had a closet that was dark? And what would a tear do to a heart like that heart? That had a closet that was dark and that had fire that was burning around it.
Let her know that it's okay to be sad and angry.
And can a tear let her know that?
Mm-hmm.
And would a tear be interested in going to a chest as it falls? And could a tear be interested in going to the top of the stomach where a drum had to beat like a heart? And let a tear fall for as long as and far as it wants to go, and whether it like to fall to where a fire had burnt to an Aunt Phyllis's house, and take all the time for a tear to fall, clear and long, as it would like to do. In this segment, we had both the children together and waiting, and they're trying to think of some place to go. And what I'm looking to do here is, that's a very difficult task for a child to decide that. But we still have these metaphors left here that are unused. So I tried the tear and invited the tear across to go to them. You see, a tear that's still in an eye is in fact a foreign object, because tears should be outside. So when anybody's crying on the inside, that is a foreign substance. Tears are supposed to be outside. And I want to use tears, have a great propensity for healing, but they need to be given a useful purpose. You just don't want the tears to cry out, because all that does is ends up in a circular system where they can cry again. But once this tear has cried and been useful, then there's no need for that tear again. Well, the tear didn't work. So there was a long pause, and so then I tried the fire. And could the fire go to them? Of course, I'm not sure what on earth can a fire do. I don't want it to burn them up. But the fire can help choose the right person. And so the fire burns itself out in a pathway to Aunt Phyllis's house. What's important here, again, that the fire, one idea I had thought of right at the beginning was, look, if I make that tear fall, it can fall on the fire and put the fire out. But see, if you do that, you deny the power and the healing of that fire. So the fire goes and burns the path, and then it starts to burn out. And then I'm asking questions to see if the tear can do something. And a lot of these to begin with are guesses. I don't know whether they'll work or not. And so then the tear can begin to fall, because then she can cry when it's safe. And I thought, well, it might be useful to fall past some of these other features. It can fall past the heart, fall past the fire, and then maybe onto the path. So we'll find out whether that was useful or not. And so, what happens next? As a tear falls, and she can be safe.
It's like a waterfall inside.
And it's like a waterfall inside. And as it's like a waterfall inside, what would a waterfall like to do?
The little girl can just stand in it.
And does a little girl like to stand in a waterfall?
Yes.
And as she stands in a waterfall, what happens next?
She feels clean.
And she feels clean. And as she feels clean and a waterfall falls, what would a waterfall like to do next?
Just keeps running.
And,
It just makes the little girl happy.
and is she like a waterfall running?
Yes.
And that's quite different, to have a waterfall running, cool and clear, than to have a pot boiling.
Yes.
And to have a tear that wants to fall but can't. And it's quite different to have a waterfall that's running.
Yes.
And a little girl can be in a waterfall that's running, and it's been a long time since she's known about running, because her feet were glued.
Mm-hmm.
And what would she like to do when a waterfall keeps running?
Just play in it.
And can she play?
Mm-hmm.
And does she like to play?
Yes.
And she likes to play. And would a cloth, a rag that had been torn in two, would that rag be interested in going to a waterfall that's running?
No, it's gone.
And it's gone. And a pot. And could a pot that had been boiling be interested in going to a waterfall?
No, it's empty.
And it's empty. And what could a little girl do with an empty pot?
She'd like to just leave it where it is.
And can she leave it where it is?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be in her head
No.
any longer. And eyes that had a teardrop. Do eyes that had a teardrop like to look at a running waterfall?
Yes.
And that's much different than not being able to have a teardrop fall.
Yes.
And a heart that burns, and a chest that burns. Does a heart and chest like to be in a waterfall that's running?
Yes, because they're cool now.
And they're cool now. And they're cool now. And a stomach that pounds like a drum. And would a little girl be interested in a drum like that drum?
No, not anymore.
And she doesn't have to have that drum beat anymore. And can she listen to the beat and the pound of a waterfall?
Mm-hmm.
And does she like that sound?
Yes.
And she doesn't have to listen to the sound of an angry mum anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And a face. And a face doesn't have to have the fist of a shadow any longer. And does a face like that face like the pounding of a waterfall?
Yes.
And that's a different kind of pounding, isn't it?
Yes.
Because that face can turn into a waterfall and can turn away from a waterfall.
She likes the water hitting her face.
And she likes the water hitting her face. And a waterfall can clean a face. And does she like to have a t-shirt and blue jeans and a waterfall like that?
Yes. Because her Aunt Phyllis doesn't care if she gets wet.
And Aunt Phyllis doesn't care if she gets
Mm-mm.
wet. And does she like that?
Mm-hmm.
And would she like anything else?
No.
And she can play in her waterfall. And she can play in her waterfall. And she doesn't have to be torn apart. Or a part of her that's angry and wants to leave. And a part of her that's sad and wants to stay. All of her can be together in the waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
And would she like anything else?
No.
And she can be there in the waterfall. And so in this final phase, we have the proclamation. This is where we look at all the metaphors that to begin with were quite negative and dysfunctional, and to find out which ones are discarded and which ones can in fact be healing. And so the wonderful change and transformation of this tear that fell like a waterfall. You'll also notice that the change to the personal pronoun she instead of they, so that these two are now integrated together in the presence of the waterfall. And so then I want to check and bring all the metaphors back, see if the boiling pot could be useful, or if the rag in which it was torn apart could be used. So this is where sometimes my own hallucinations get in the road. I thought, well, this would be great. That pot could go and be like a boat, and then this could be a sail. Could be a lovely ketch rig sailing boat there. But those are my hallucinations. And so I'm just asking the questions and seeing to bring all these metaphors together and in a combination that will be useful. But the major healing element here is this waterfall as it falls down upon her. And then also I want to bring all her history back to recapitulate the whole scene so that the fist comes back, and to contrast the difference, that it's quite different to have a waterfall pounding instead of a fist pounding. Likewise with the drum and the fire and the tear, so that a waterfall can be running. It's very different from a tear about to fall but can't fall. So this, I think, helps to bring all these elements together, and needs a little time now for some cognition and for a little understanding about part of the process. So let's just find out. And so, do you have any comments you'd like to make about the experience and about what happened?
I forgot about the incident with my sister being born and having to care for my mother, and the part of me that was sad and part of me that was really angry about having to do that. And the fact that I can have both emotions, and that that's okay, and that there was always a part of me that was stronger and motivated me to keep doing things. So I just let that part of me for the first time just take over. It's always been the part that's been sad that I've listened to. So this time I listened to the other.
And that's the importance of the anger, where you have to value both sides. Otherwise you get caught in that push and pull, the ambivalence of paying attention to both sides and not knowing which one to choose.
Right.
And so now you have both parts.
Thank you.
As your therapist, this was really fascinating for me to see what happened with the metaphors today. Do you remember when I first started doing the metaphor work and you had said to me that you were so afraid that you could never be rid of your parents until they died?
Yeah, I remember that real well. It was like as if it happened yesterday for me. We did the piece. I remember it involved my father holding a knife. It was a fist. And one of the first times that I really felt free to let go of some of the secrets that I had kept. And this burning inside of me. And we removed the, as I guess I understand it, or I even perceived it that day, I almost felt as if it was an exorcism of my parents, an internalization of my parents. And we did the piece, and I felt really strange leaving your office. I thought, what is she going to think of me, and all of that. And I remember going back to work and walking in the office and having a couple people say to me, you look really different. And one of the first things that they commented about was how my eyes looked, that they didn't know what was different about them or what was different about me, but they knew something was different. And I remember being really excited inside, as if something has happened, and that it's different and that people can notice it. And that was real encouraging for me to experience that.
I can remember feeling kind of funny about that myself. I wasn't sure you'd ever want to come back. I knew that something major had happened, and I was new enough in doing the metaphor therapy at that time. I wasn't sure what that major thing was going to be, except that when you came back, you were so radiant.
Thank you.
And it was really neat because it wasn't only my perception, but
Yeah,
evidently you
people's.
had those kinds of comments right after the session.
Right,
Yeah, so that really made it nice.
right.
Right. The other thing I remember about that is that before we did some work on the fist, which was part of that first experiential,
Right.
that oftentimes when I was doing traditional therapy with you, I would sit there and I would see these fingerprints on your throat.
Right.
And I was sort of debating whether or not to mention that.
Right. I remember that.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And once we got into the metaphor therapy and you were able to discover without my having to point that out. And I can remember being really delighted.
I think it frightened me sometimes, too, when I was having some of the physical sensations. The fingers on my throat, because I could actually see the, like the welting of the shape of the fingers. My face and my chest and my arms would be burning, you know, and red, and I would have welts coming up when we would start talking. And I didn't know what was going on. That was real frightening.
Yes, yes. And I was concerned about re-traumatizing you by
Right.
pointing it out to you that I was seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been through such severe abuse, and yet we've laughed a lot, and we've had some fun,
Right.
and I think we've done a little bit of crying, too. I think what's significant is that you are who you are, and that you experienced a very disturbed mother and a very
Right.
disturbed father,
Right.
and that there were unusually cruel, sadistic measures being taken,
Right.
so that as you did the metaphor work today, it became very apparent to me about boiling pots, because that
Right.
has been in our metaphor work before.
Right.
Would you care to share?
Yeah, boiling pots have been part of my life since I was a real young child. Probably the first time I can remember would be maybe 5 or 6, the boiling pots. My mother would have boiling pots to, I think, sterilize instruments that she was using on me for torture. In terms of, I believe that she probably did like DNCs or participated in a couple of abortions for me. And so I can always remember the instruments being there or putting things inside of me. My father would heat things in the boiling pot. My room was right off of the kitchen, so it was something was always boiling, and that would always frighten me when I would hear water boiling, what was going to happen. My brother was scalded with water that was boiling, you know, in the kitchen. So I think that's been a part of my life for a long, long time.
Yes, there were some immersions in water too.
Right, right. We had like a cold bin downstairs, and they had these old drums, water drums, and my father and mother both would fill them with water and then immerse me in them for long periods of time. And also I would be in a bathtub with my head held underwater. So it was very different for me today to work with water and experience this as something that I could play in and that I could
Yes.
enjoy, and that something the water could fall on my face and that I wouldn't be frightened. I was always afraid I was going to drown in the water. So today it was very, very different for me to experience that type of water.
Yeah. So I remember back, it seems to me that the incident in the water drum
Mm-hmm.
came at a fairly early age,
Yeah, I was 4.
and all you really needed to do was to go to the bathroom,
Oh, yeah.
and that your mother went into a rage because I
Right.
think it was in the middle of the night.
I woke her up in the middle of the night because I was frightened. And we had just moved into the house. This was a brand new house, and I was afraid to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And so I woke my mother up, and it pursued into like a beating in the bathroom, and then calling for help, and my father coming and her telling them that nothing was wrong. And because of that, then she took me down in the coal bin and left me down there in the drum for the night.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
And that wasn't just for a couple hours. I think that was a
No.
very extended period of
Right.
time.
Right.
And that's one of the first times we worked in the metaphors with your being stuck.
Right,
Do
right.
you
Being
remember
stuck
the
in the
stuckness?
drum. Yeah.
Yeah.
All I knew that it was dark and I couldn't get out of whatever it was that I was in. And I didn't even know at first what I was stuck in.
So you have repeated over and over that sensation of stuck around
Right.
the fact that the chronicity of your situation,
Mhm.
that from your infancy, when we found there
Right.
were sadistic measures
Right.
being done to you physically and sexually,
Mhm.
at certain months of age, I think we'd
Right.
established maybe 6 or 9 months
Yeah, we went
old.
back as far as 6 months.
Yeah. And so that for you, it was not a once in a while or a certain period of time, but for you, it was a chronic. It was day in and day out.
Mhm.
And that as time went on, it's like it began with your mother,
Right.
and your mother had repeated psychiatric hospitalizations.
Right.
And your father joined in at a later time.
Right.
And then even later on, then your brother was invited to participate
Right.
with the physical and sexual abuse.
Well, I remember when I first came into therapy, I thought that it was just a sexual abuse from the time I was 6 to 18. And it was like I felt sorry for my mother, and that she was the one who really protected me and saved me the best she could. And then discovering that it really went back to when I was a small child.
Mm-hmm. The crystal clear tears, that's something very significant to both of us, isn't it?
Right. I think for me, too, the fact that it was crystal clear, that I needed to cry, and that I had never allowed myself to cry. I was never permitted to cry. And then as a result of one tear, that it led into a whole waterfall, was very, very freeing experience for me. So, yeah.
Yes. As I remember, it was looking out behind your eyes.
Right.
Is how.
Right. Before, when I would always work on the piece about crying or holding back tears and never shedding tears, I always felt as if they were right behind my eyes, ready to, like, flood over.
Yes.
It's like a flood that was waiting just to happen.
Yes. The fire we certainly have dealt with before.
Right.
And the rag
Mm-hmm.
was especially important today. Could you comment on the
Yeah.
rag?
I was surprised how it really came up today, because a rag was something that was always put in my mouth so that people, the neighbors, my brothers and sisters couldn't hear me crying or screaming when they would do certain things to me. And then when it showed up in my stomach, because the other thing is I could always see my mother or father wringing the rag out with the hot water after they cleaned me up after whatever they did to me, and then tearing it apart, for myself. I wanted it to just stay a rag on the floor when I was working the piece, and then all of a sudden it became helpful to me that I could take the rag and really finally get rid of the boiling pot. So it changed for me. It didn't
Yes.
have to be something that was shoved in my mouth anymore.
That's right. And so that
Yeah.
was very different.
Yeah, very, very different for me.
The fist today, too.
Yeah, the fist has been with me, I think, as long as I can remember. Like I said before, it's been something that's been a threat to me, that I was to keep the secrets or something would happen. And then today to allow the fist to hit something else besides my face. That was very, very different. I don't think I ever thought of that happening, except just to take the punishment. So today it was very different.
Yes. And then the drum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The first time I discovered the drum was a couple weeks ago, but I think the drum has been with me. Last time it was when I was 12, but now today I was 6, and so the drum has been an important part of my life, and that I could really, it was a motivating factor almost today to move me out of the house and to get me going and to take me beyond the fear of my mother.
And a couple weeks ago when we worked with the drum,
Mm-hmm.
the drum wanted to stay. The little girl
Yes.
wanted it to stay.
Right, right. She wasn't afraid of the drum, and it was okay to have it. And so it was okay last time, but today it's like I don't need it anymore.
That's right. And the other metaphor that came up was the feet that are glued.
Yeah. I think it represented one more time of just feeling stuck and never being able to move, feeling like I was always going to be held prisoner in that house. Whatever they held me in, whether that was a barrel or my bedroom or a closet or the coal bin, I was just always feeling stuck. And today it was like I had a way to get beyond being stuck.
There was a great deal of sadistic torture
Right.
in being tied up, literally.
Right,
And that, I believe, were your hands
right.
and your feet.
My hands and my feet, so I could never really use my hands and feet to really free myself. I had no means of freeing myself. So,
Yes, and beyond that experience in the drum, it was such a small area for you to be
right.
kept in for such a long period of time.
Also, I was I had been beaten before being put in the drum, so I was very sore and I was very sick, and so I had no energy. And today it was like it was different. I had energy, I had ways, I was given time to think of ways that I could get out, ways that I could be free that I didn't have before.
It's been 2 weeks since the resolution. And what I've experienced is a real peacefulness with myself. I feel integrated. I feel whole. I don't feel torn apart anymore. I feel that the little girl is very much a part of me, and that she's no longer living in the adult shadow. That was one of the major pieces that I discovered, was the shadow that I felt my whole life. I always felt someone was going to be following me, someone was always after me. And now I don't have that experience at all. The shadow is gone. And the little girl no longer lives in the adult shadow, but now we're one and there isn't a shadow. The other real significant thing for me was this week was the waterfall. I continue to go back to that when I need to be encouraged and I want to play and I want to have fun. But it also reminds me and made me aware of all of the abuse that I really experienced. My parents and my brother were very sadistic and very cruel and very mean. And I never thought that I would ever, ever be able to be rid of that, and those memories that hung on and the flashbacks. But now the only flashback I have is the waterfall and the little girl and the happiness that she experiences. And along with the waterfall, I think really comes the physical symptoms that I had. And I had many physical symptoms for 18 years, and I have not had any in the 2 weeks. And so I think that's an affirmation for me that the abuse no longer has control over my life, that I have control. The other thing would be the anger and the sadness that I dealt with, the split that I experienced in myself of the part that wanted to run away and the part that was sad and wanted to stay. That those signs for me of being angry are in the past. I don't experience the sadness. But the anger has been a positive in the sense that it's motivating me to go on with my life, that I don't have to live in the past anymore, that the future is something that I can create, and that anger has helped me to really see that. I don't feel profoundly sad, as I said earlier, but I feel that peacefulness and that calm, and I know that it's an experience that's changed me, but I also know that it's so deep that it's going to continue to motivate me and to change me, and I just know that I have to let myself be with those feelings and see where it takes me.